you for joining tonight for the EA update for the Angling Trust Southwest Fisheries Forum. My name's Liam Timothy and I'm a Fisheries Technical Officer for the Environment Agency in the North Wessex patch. I generally cover the Somerset area, and this ranges from the West Somerset streams, the Patton Tone catchment, the River Brew, Axe, all the way up to Clevedon and the Blind Yew. And I'll sometimes cover the Bristol Avon catchment as well, although this is generally dealt with my colleagues Jodie and Emma. I'm here tonight just to give you a bit of an update on what the Environment Agency have been up to over the last year, which obviously isn't as much as we would like to have been doing due to COVID-19, but we've still cracked on and got as much done as we can. I'd like to start off with talking about rod license sales over the last couple of years. And as you can see, in the years 2019 and 20, around 940,000 tickets were sold. And in the last year, the sort of 2020/21, we sold just shy of 1.1 million, which was a 15% increase on the numbers the year before. So that's great news, and I'm sure anybody that's been fishing in the last few months has seen the increase on the bank as well. We've got a few fisheries improvement projects going, and the first one is Crookwood Fisheries toilet facilities, and we've basically just given Crookwood some funding and they've installed their own toilet facilities. So we've got the River Tone habitat enhancements, and this is partnered with West Country's Rivers Trust, Taunton Fly Fishers and Wellington Angling Association. And this has been a multi-year project, and I believe we're currently on phase 3 and year 3. So phase 3 has included West Country Rivers Trust going out with volunteers from Taunton Fly Fishers and Wellington AA, and they've carried out some selective coppicing, and they've installed some marginal coarse wooded debris, some wooded flow deflectors, and they've carried out some bank revetment works. And overall, I think the main goal is to just improve the spawning gravels on the rivers and just install a bit more juvenile salmonid habitat. And they've also carried out some bank revetment works, just to save the banks eroding and sort of reduce that extra siltation within the river. Enhancements, and this is also with West Country Rivers Trust and Ilchester and District Angling Association. So West Country Rivers Trust are the contractors carrying out most of the works, with some volunteer work thrown in from Ilchester and District Angling Association. And we're currently on phase 2 of the project. And phase 1 was essentially West Country Rivers Trust carrying out walkovers and surveys to just investigate what issues there actually are with the river and where habitat can be improved the most. And over the last few years, after discussions with Ilchester and District, the Environment Agency have sort of carried out a 3-year stocking program on the river, and we've now stocked in a few thousand bream, roach, chub and dace. So we're now on to phase 2 of the River Yeo habitat enhancements, which is the in-river improvements, which is similar to the in-river improvements on the River Tone, but this is just going to cater towards coarse fish a little bit more rather than salmonids. So we'll be hinging trees to give juvenile fish just that little bit of extra habitat, and especially for when the river's in high flows and the juvenile fish can just sit in around these hinged trees and prevent themselves from getting washed downstream. They've also are going to install some brash berms and bankside deflectors. Once again, this is just to get a bit of sinuosity back into the river, and they will most likely install some near any gravelly areas as well, and this will just help remove some of the silt and algae and clear it up for fish spawning. And West Country Rivers Trust are also looking into investigate some of the barriers to migration on the Yeo, and hopefully in future we'll be able to secure some funding to get rid of these. Improvements, and this is just the Environment Agency partnered up with Lavington Lakes, and phase 1 of the project was the EA funding Lavington Lakes to install some drainage channels around the fishery just to improve access a little bit. And they've also regraded and stabilized around 40 meters of their bank, and this is just to prevent erosion and extra siltation in the pond. So as you can see, they've done a very good job of it, and the banks are looking much better now. And they've also purchased some equipment for future maintenance of the fishery. And we're now on to phase 2 of the Lavington Lakes improvement project, and this mainly includes aquatic vegetation control that's going to be dealt with by a specialist contractor. And as you can see in the photo, a lot of the lake has become quite choked up with lilies, and they're going to get a contractor in to remove some of these and just open the lake up a little bit more for angling access. And there's also going to be the installation of an informative sign, which is going to be designed by the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. And this is just to inform anglers and the public of what fish species are in the lakes, and going to give a little bit of information about the nearby woodland. There's fish stocking in 2021, but I actually meant 2020, as these fish were all stocked in December 2020. Got a total of 9,200 fish that were stocked into 7 different sites, including the Somerset Froome, River Yeo, the Sheppey, West Sedgemoor Main Drain, Marston Pond, Birds Quarry and Rust Pond. And here I've just added in a couple of nice photos of a tench being stocked into Birds Quarry in Somerset, and some roach, bream and tench being stocked into the West Sedgemoor Main Drain. And again in this photo we've got some of the nice juvenile tench from Calverton Fish Farm. All of the fish stocked this winter were from the EA's Calverton Fish Farm and are all paid for by rod license funds. And then on the right hand side we've got some juvenile barbel being stocked into the Somerset Froome. Spring we've also carried out some crucian carp stocking to assist with the National Crucian Conservation Project, and we stocked 2 sites, the first one being the Beaches, which is a small coarse fishery just outside of Bridgewater, and they received 100 crucians. And we've also got Breen Golf and Country Park in Somerset, which we stocked with 200 crucians. We stocked 2 lakes, obviously 100 per lake. And although these ponds aren't fished, we'll be using these as arc sites, and we'll give the crucians a couple of years to get comfortable with their surroundings, hopefully spawn a few times, and then we'll look at stocking these crucians out into different fisheries. And once again, all of these crucians are stocked from Calverton Fish Farm fish and are paid for by rod license funds. And then we've just got a couple of photos of the little bars of gold. Out as much as we would have liked over the last year and carry out our usual fish surveys. We were able to get out recently and carry out a fish rescue on a small ditch alongside the River Parrett in Langport. And this came about because we had a concerned member of the public call up our incident hotline and make us aware of some fish in distress in this small ditch, to which a couple of the fisheries officers went out to investigate. And although when they turned up, the fish didn't actually appear to be in distress at that time, we know that this is a ditch that can often dry out or get choked up with weeds and can have some algae problems as well. So although they weren't distressed at the time, they most likely would be in the near future when the temperatures warm up. So we went down to the site, 4 of us, 2 on the boat, catching and electrofishing, and 2 members of the fisheries team just pulling the boat along. And I think we probably electrofished around 250 meters of river, which threw up a couple of thousand very healthy looking roach. And we also had some nice dace, tench, bream, eels, pike, and then obviously the minor species like minnows. So all in all, the ditch was actually stuffed with fish, and all of these were then moved across the adjoining bank and put back into the River Parrett, where they all swam away happily for another day. Invasive Species Week, I thought this would be a good time to talk a little bit about topmouth gudgeon. These are nasty little critters that we recently had to deal with in North Wessex. And in late 2019, early 2020, we actually had 2 sites in our patch that were found to contain topmouth gudgeon. So we had to go in and carry out eradications on both fisheries, which I will talk about in a couple of slides' time. But for now, I'll just talk a little bit about the species itself. And there's a photo of a few different sized topmouth gudgeon. And it's no surprise that when they're smaller, they could be mistaken for a native fish, whether it be a small carp or chub or dace. But they originated from Southeast Asia, so obviously they're not a native species here. And the first recorded topmouth gudgeon in the UK were in 1990 at a Hampshire fishery. Although it is believed that topmouth gudgeon actually came into the country in the 1980s, but this was the first official recording of topmouth gudgeon. They're introduced as an ornamental species, as a lot of people like to get some nice ornamental species in the fish tanks, and some people get bored of them and often pour them down the drains or into ponds. But topmouth gudgeon are crafty little creatures, and they can often hitch a ride with other fish by hiding in their mouths or underneath their gill covers, or even by hiding in the folds underneath another fish's fins. And they're generally a pretty small species. I think the biggest topmouth gudgeon you're going to find is only going to be around 3 or 4 inches. So it's quite easy for them to hide amongst a stocking of fish. As I said, they are an invasive non-native species, and they are due to be eradicated where possible. And it's illegal to stock or keep topmouth gudgeon under the current keeping and introduction of fish regulations. And if you ever come across a topmouth gudgeon, you must inform the EA as soon as possible. Talk a little bit about the impacts of topmouth gudgeon. I'll start off with sort of talking about the more environmental impacts. And they do enjoy eating the eggs of other fish species. So if you get them into your lake, this is seriously going to hinder the recruitment of your native fish stocks. And exactly the same for rivers. It generally takes topmouth gudgeon around a year to mature, but then after that, they do actually have the ability to spawn multiple times a year. And I think they generally wait until the temperatures are above 16 degrees. And then after that, you've potentially got 2, 3, maybe even 4 spawnings per year. Topmouth gudgeon are adapted to living in a wide range of environments, and they generally prefer lakes, ponds, reservoirs, but have definitely been known to survive quite happily in canals, sluggish and slow rivers, ditches and drains. They generally don't like faster flowing rivers, but it is possible for them to survive in them. And They're quite an aggressive little creature, so they do tend to outcompete our native fish stocks, and especially with the fact that they eat other eggs. So, that hinders the native fish stocks. They grow very quickly, and they're generally just quite an aggressive fish. And yet, as a result of all this, the presence of topmouth gudgeon results in poor growth and recruitment of native fish. So if you're a fishery owner, these little creatures are a nightmare for you, because you will end up with a large biomass of fish, which is mainly consisting of topmouth gudgeon. And once again, that results in poor angling success. So unless you're an angler turning up with 2-ounce line and a size 28 hook, you're probably not going to catch a big bag of gudgeon. And it also results in a reduction in biodiversity. As I said, if topmouth gudgeon are left alone in a pond for long enough, I think they would eventually just outcompete all other fish species, and you'd just be left with a hole in the ground filled with topmouth gudgeon. And we need to get rid of topmouth gudgeon as soon as possible, just to reduce the risk of them spreading to the wider aquatic environment. Obviously, this is a very big risk in Somerset, because we've got the Somerset levels and moors, which consist of a lot of slow-moving and quite sluggish drains, ditches and rivers, where topmouth gudgeon could happily excuse me, where they could happily pardon me, I'm just going to have a little drink. Yeah, where they could happily take hold of a river and very quickly wipe out all other species. And it is very costly to eradicate topmouth gudgeon from a fishery. And, depending on the size and how many lakes there are, it could be anything from, say, £10,000 upwards of hundreds of thousands of pounds. And any fishery that has an eradication taking place will obviously need to close during this, which could be a few weeks up to a few months, and that equates to quite a large loss of earnings. So once again, as soon as you see topmouth gudgeon, just report it, and hopefully they can be eradicated as soon as possible. Methods of topmouth gudgeon. There are a few, most of which aren't very effective, if I'm honest. So rod and line, as I stated, unless you're using your size 28 hook and your 2-ounce line, there's probably a slim chance of you actually catching many, if any, topmouth gudgeon. So I don't think this is a very effective method. Electrofishing, this will definitely catch you a few more topmouth gudgeon, but you'll also have a lot slip the radar as well. You can carry out seine nettings, but once again, as topmouth gudgeon generally only grow to around 3 inches, and most of the fish will probably only be a few millimeters or centimeters long, it's highly likely that you're going to have quite a lot of small topmouth gudgeon slip through the net and live to see another day. You've got the option of draining down a pond and liming it, but this has its own issues with obviously having to keep the pond drained down and void of fish for quite a long time. And any little pockets of water left in the pond will gladly have a topmouth gudgeon sit in it and just ride it out until the levels raise back up. And because they are such tough little creatures and can handle a lot of low dissolved oxygen events, they will just sit it out in a small little puddle. And the final option is piscicide, which is generally the only way to actually eradicate topmouth gudgeon. And this is used using a piscicide called rotenone, and it only kills fish. So whenever we come to carry out an eradication using piscicide, where possible, we'll try and remove as many native fish as possible, and then any topmouth gudgeon that are left they will be dispatched with the piscicide and then removed. Two topmouth gudgeon eradications in the Wessex area back in 2019/20, and this is the first site. So it was a very heavily stocked commercial, as you can see by the photo, which was just one net of one pond. And thankfully, because there were a few ponds on site, we were able to remove all of the native fish from one of the ponds and then stock them into the other ponds. And then the fish that we removed, the lake that we removed all of the fish from, this was drained down and treated with rotenone to kill all of the topmouth gudgeon left in there. And after a couple of months, the rotenone diluted enough and we could then quarantine the fish stocks and then reintroduce them back into this pond. And this is a little photo of a few Environment Agency staff quarantining the fish, and this basically just makes sure that any fish that we put back into a treated pond don't have any topmouth gudgeon hitching a lift. So first things first, we'll look inside the mouth of the fish, under each gill cover, and then we'll check every single fold of a fin just to make sure they aren't tucked away under there. And this is a two-step process, so we'll have two teams, and each fish is checked twice over. Any topmouth gudgeon that were found were removed and disposed of, and all of the ponds have now had the quarantining and treating, and rotenoning carried out on each pond, and all fish have been restocked back into their respective ponds. And we carried out our first year of post-eradication monitoring in 2020 to find no topmouth gudgeons, thankfully. So that's all looking pretty hopeful, and we've now got 4 more years of post-topmouth gudgeon monitoring just to make sure that we didn't miss any. Was a moderately stocked commercial venue, and unfortunately there was only one pond at this site, so we deemed it too risky to actually try and hold on to the native fish. And unfortunately, prior to the actual eradication taking place, we removed these fish and humanely euthanized them, and were then able to crack on and carry on with the eradication itself. So once all of the native stocks were removed, we dropped the levels of the lake by a foot or two, just to make sure that if we had heavy rain while there was piscicide in the actual lake, it didn't sort of leak out and enter the wider environment and didn't leach into any nearby streams or rivers. And although this isn't actually the rotenone being applied, this just shows the conditions that we were out treating the lake in. And before we applied any of the rotenone, we had to go out and in the boat and break up an inch thick of ice throughout the lake. And then once the rotenone had diluted, after a couple of months, we then stocked the fishery with some of our fish from Calverton Fish Farm, and this was a couple of thousand rudd, tench and crucians. And obviously those are all fairly small fish and normally one summer fish. So the Angling Club have employed their own fish stocking program to get some larger fish in there, and they've recently managed to stock in some nice tench up to around £6. So I think there's a good future for the fishery. And once again, we went back in 2020 and carried out our first year's post-eradication topmouth gudgeon monitoring, and no topmouth gudgeon were found, thankfully. Listening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to fire away.